Welcome everyone. Again, my name is Gvido, and today we will be talking about MDX debugging, and we will be learning how to turn errors into solutions. How it all started, or like how I got the idea of this topic, is that I had training with one of the customers, and it was live training. We were on a call. He was sharing a screen, and I was basically trying to help with the MDX so that we can get through the tasks faster. And obviously, he was trying to make some MDX calculations. He got an error, but to my surprise, this person had the error. He instantly closed the window and went back to documentation. And I was like, what? There was useful information on the screen about what did you do wrong? Why did you close the screen doing this, right? So for you guys not to be that guy, we will be talking about the errors, going through the most common errors and see how, what do they mean and what we can do about them to help you solve your problems. So let's start with the most common error, probably the most common error you can get in eazyBI. Formal is not valid, must not be a set. But before we jump into the error, let's look at the calculation and see like, what does this thing do? What is this supposed to do? So what we want to filter out different fixed versions, and we want to filter out those fixed versions that have just one letter and it ends with a 0, right? So this will be the filtering process. We go through one by one, we check, oh, this is the one we want, that's the one we want, and then once we have a short list, this is the end result, what we're expecting. But we have this pesky error that tells us that our formula is not valid. Very useful, right? Duh. And then it says the member expression, and this is the formula that we wrote. And at the end it says must not be a set, right? So in order to understand why we must not have a set or must not be a set, let's investigate what is a set. Right? A set is basically a list of members, a list of elements from one dimension. Right? So the emphasis here is that it's, first of all, it's one dimension, and it's a bunch of members, a bunch of elements. It can be a bunch of issues, a bunch of assignees, a bunch of statuses, and they're kind of clumped together in a pile, so to say. There's multiple ways how to get a set with MDX. You can use functions like .members, you can use descendants function, and there's a specific syntax in eazyBI with these curly brackets, where you can use multiple members, put them in these curly brackets, and eazyBI will be like, oh, that's a set, because we have the curly brackets here. You can look at it this way, right? So when we have a set, we have a bunch of stuff. We have like a pile, bunch of stuff. And what's the problem with that? Why isn't eazyBI allowing us to have a set, right? And the problem lies that we need to take that pile of things and we need to put all of that into this little box. And generally speaking, eazyBI doesn't really know what do you want to do with that, because there's multiple things we can do, right? We can get what's the average between all those. We can get minimum value, maximum value. We can summarize all of that together. We can count how many things are in the set. We can get one from the set, and we can also aggregate the set. So a common question I get is, what's the difference between aggregate and sum? Well, the question is they're almost the same. It's just that aggregate, when you aggregate something, you also get an option to expand, right? This plus button, this expand option is available when you use the aggregate. So in order to solve our problem, let's use that, right? So the formula says again, we must not be a set. So here, the filter function, we filter draw issues, and then we get a bunch of fixed versions. Sorry, we filter to fixed versions, we get a bunch of fixed versions. And in order to fix this error, we can simply add aggregate. So now it's not just a pile of issues. Now we're aggregating those issues together in an expandable list. Right? That makes sense? Okay. Very good, very good. So, okay. So we just learned about new aggregate function. That's very cool. I'm going to go to documentation, and you see there's an example here. Well, I'm just going to grab this example with two priorities, highest and high, and I will replace them with labels. But I just replace them with labels when I'm getting this error right here. I see some smiles in the room already. I'm getting this error. It's like, but it looks the same, very similar, right? I have aggregate, and I have these members or these labels that I wanted to aggregate together. But eazyBI tells us that formula is not valid. Okay, very cool. Null function matches signature. Null function matches signature, aggregate, member, member, member. So what's up with that? Well, we can understand a little bit more about this syntax, or what do we need, by going to understanding what's a member in general. I mentioned a couple of times. You can see a lot of times the interface as well. Members are mentioned. And members are just simply like one element, one thing, one member from one dimension. And that's it. It can be one row. This is a member. This is a member. This is a member. And when you put those members in MDX, they look like this, for example. That's the first issue. This is the second issue. And then here we also have the demo gamma, the project right here. And you don't really need to know how to write this, because you can either use bookmarks. So just bookmark them, you enable them, and then this will show up in the reports. Or you can just autocomplete, which is, it's better to bookmark. So you don't need to know, but the important thing is you need to recognize what is a member, and when you see one, you need to be like, oh, that's a member, I'm working with a member. Like, that's the most important thing. And members can also have things like properties, they can have different, when you use measures, they can show different numbers, and so on and so on. So, if we go to the documentation, like, so member is just one element, right? If I look at the documentation says that in order to use aggregate function, we need to use this syntax right here. We need to give the aggregate function a set, right? Remember, set is a bunch of members. And optionally, so this means this is optionally, we can also add numeric expression. We don't need that right now, so we can just focus on set expression. But if you look at the error, we see that instead of giving eazyBI set, we're giving it 3 individual members, 1 member, 2 member, 3 members, right? So this is the difference. This is why eazyBI is confused. It's like, well, eazyBI is like, well, I'm expecting a set, but you're giving me 3 individual members. So the solution, curly brackets. Right? So again, in eazyBI, when you use curly brackets, eazyBI will understand that, oh, you're giving me a set. So to solve our problem with giving eazyBI 3 members, we can put curly brackets at the front and the end, like this, and now these are not individual members. Now these together are a set. So let's move on to the next thing. So let's say here I wanted to create a calculated member formula that shows me how many issues were created with status in progress and also on status to do. Right? So we have in progress, in to do. I just heard about a tuple, so I can use a tuple and then put a bunch of things, and it should show like what's the result between those. Right? But eazyBI tells us the tuple contains more than one member of hierarchy status. So what was this supposed to mean now? In order to understand this error, let's take a look at 2 different things. Let's define what's a tuple, and then let's look at what is the hierarchy. So first, let's start with a tuple. Here we have a report where we have assignee David, and we have a project component right. Right? So we have those two things. And when we combine those, or like see what's the common issues created for those, we can see there's two issues created between David and component right. We can take these two members, put them in brackets like so, opening, closing brackets, we can put a comma, and we have a tuple. So if we use this formula, we create a formula, technically we could remove assignees, we can remove projects, and we'll still get to number 2. That's the purpose of one of the purposes of tuple, so that you can put this selection into MDX. So you don't have to select in the report, you can do the selection in the MDX. So, but this report contains more selections. It's not just David and right, it's also January, it's done, and it's also issues created. So if we put all of those together, this will be a full tuple of everything in the report, where we have assignee, project, time, status, measures. And if you make this formula, right, you will get the number 2. And the number will stay 2 even if you remove this, you remove January, you remove assignee, because we put that in the MDX calculation. It's not in the report, but it's in the calculation, okay? And I forgot to mention, very important thing, there's one crucial part or one crucial difference between a set. A tuple must contain only one member from each dimension, or one member from one dimension. It cannot contain more, right? We talked about sets. It was all members from the same dimension. Here, the members must be from different dimensions, right? Only one of them. That kind of almost solves our problem, but let's investigate the hierarchy. So it said also hierarchy. So what is really hierarchy? So firstly, to put it very simply, hierarchy is basically the dimension we're going to use. Right? So it's easy to remember. Hierarchy is pretty much the same as the dimension. However, sometimes if the dimension has multiple hierarchies, then it also contains information of which hierarchy we're using. Right? So here we have default hierarchies don't have a specific name because they're just default, right? So here's an example where we have years, quarters, months. So this is the default hierarchy with years, quarters, months, and days. And you can also look at data in a weekly hierarchy, right? So here is the weekly hierarchy. And instead of looking at the data from quarters and months, we look at the data from years, weeks, and days. And sometimes I get the question, why can't we just put those together, right? And the thing is that the problem here is that a week can start in the middle of the month, or a week can start the middle of the month. You can have Monday first and last, so they don't really fit together. There are methods you can like kind of cheese that and use the specific hierarchies, but they don't really work together. Right? So that's why different hierarchies. And there's plenty more dimensions that have more hierarchies. Right? So now that we have figured out what are tuples and what are hierarchies, let's look at the error message again. And let's look at the error message again. So the formula is not valid. Tuple contains more than one member of the hierarchy status. So what eazyBI is telling us that this status hierarchy, we're using more than one member from that, right? And we talked about it, the tuple can only contain one. So we can see that now we have two statuses from the one dimension, which is not good. So how do we solve this? We can solve this by using the aggregate that we just learned about and creating a calculated member that aggregates those two statuses together. And the thing is that calculated members are still members. So that's still, if you make a calculation with a bunch of members, that's still going to be one member. So now we will create this in progress and to do, calculate a member in status dimension, and instead of using two of those, we can just use one of the one calculation we created. I'm getting thumbs up. So let's look at the next example. So this is a common theme I've seen people do. So let's say I want to aggregate some projects. So my boss said, I want to know information about demo alpha, demo beta, and demo gamma projects, right? And so I use the search and bookmark functionality. I grab demo alpha, bookmark this, demo beta, bookmark this, and demo gamma, bookmark this, right? Some of you probably are already grabbing your head. What am I doing here? I know. But let's continue, right? So we bookmarked all of them here. So we can click on them, and they will eazyBI put in the correct formula in the report. So click this, this, this. We put the aggregate. Now we put the curly brackets. Everything's good. But we get this warning. Do not use other hierarchy issue subtask when defining calculated member in the hierarchy issue. Well, warnings can be ignored, right? So what can go wrong? Well, we click again, and this time eazyBI doesn't allow us to create this. And it says all arguments to function and then curly brackets must have the same hierarchy. So we know a bunch of these things. So let's rewind again. Hierarchies are ways how data are organized. And if you look at the issue dimension also has more hierarchies. It has projects, issues grouped by projects, and then there's one where subtasks are grouped by parents, and then parents by projects. And there's epic one, and there's another one. Right, so there's multiple ways how issues are also grouped up. So what we did, the error, the mistake we did, is that when we bookmarked these members, we selected this one in the default hierarchy because there's no name here. However, when we bookmarked this demo beta, we went and bookmarked a member from the subtask hierarchy. So this is where it's grouped by subtasks and parents, right? And then this one we did it correct as well. So what this error is telling us is that for the function, or like for sets, for making a set, we must have members from the same hierarchy, right? And as you can see, this one is from the subtask hierarchy, and these two are from the default one. So how do we fix that? We go back, bookmark the correct project, and replace it here. And now all of them are in the same hierarchy, and it works. Well, but you might be asking, but sometimes you do want to have members in a different hierarchy, right? For example, maybe I want to aggregate all the weeks in May. And even though I have the curly brackets and everything, I still get the warning, right? And let me spoil that. Once you create this and you try to expand this calculation, it will give you the same red error we had before. So how do you solve this one? Because we want to have different hierarchy, right? It's very simple. There is a selection on the top left corner. We can select which hierarchy do we want to create this calculation in, right? So we can open this up, pick one of those selections. We have time, weekly, fiscal, right? We can just select the time, weekly hierarchy, and the error is gone, and everything is working for us, right? More than so then let's try something very I got laughs already. So let's try something, I'm just new to eazyBI, it makes sense. I want to see if an issue was created today. Right? Something very simple. And, I'll just pick there's a time member yesterday, and I'm comparing to issue creation date, right? So if it's smaller than, if it's bigger than yesterday, obviously it's created today, right? Well, the cool thing is eazyBI allows us to create this, right? We can create this, but once we run the report, we are getting this error. This is not in the report anymore. We're getting this one. So what is going on here now? So at the beginning, we are having a lot of fun, so as you can learn here. But the rest of this is not that useful. But then it says expected value type numeric, got value Wednesday, July, yada yada. So what eazyBI is telling me is that eazyBI is like, well, I was expecting you were going to give me a number. That's why the numeric, but I got this thing instead, right? So let's look at which one is the culprit. So I created here, I used both of the members and created them separately. And you can see that yesterday, it's going to show 1 or 0, which is a number, right? It's not, doesn't make a lot of sense, but it is a number. And then we're getting this thing right here, which is not a number. So we kind of can conclude that comparison is probably just meant for numbers. We're not meant to compare numbers with some kind of text or dates, right? So instead, what we can do is we can use the correct formulas for that, or functions, right? There's a function called dateCompare, for example, and we can use this dateCompare function to compare two dates and see which one is bigger, right? So if it returns 1 or 0, it means that it will be bigger or equal to what we compare it to. So instead of using the just bigger or smaller comparison, we can use the function dateCompare, put issues created date, and put in, it's even easier, we can just put in quotation marks today. So it will compare the issue creation date today, and we'll know if it was created or not. If you want to go a step further, you can also check if it's 0 to make sure that, oh, if it's 0, that's how the function works. Then you return, oh, it was created today, otherwise not created today, right? But that's already extra. And this is I tried to put a very simple example here, but in the real life, you probably encounter this error in more complex formulas, right? So every time you see I expected this got something else, eazyBI is just telling you that, well, it was expecting some kind of value, but get something different, and it cannot compare, use that, process that, and things like that, right? So this will be like a little bit more complex place where that could happen. I was also about to mention today, that matches function also returns sometimes null pointer exception when comparing with empty strings, but apparently you guys fixed it already. So no need for that anymore, right? So the solution was the colors get empty still, but we don't need that anymore. So let's continue with the next example. Let's say I have these issue types, right? And what I want is I want to get all of these issue types, which there's standard issues, and I want everything under the standard issues except the epic one, right? And there might be new issue types coming in, so I just want to make sure that we're on the right track. So I'm going to create a calculation that will go through all the members in the standard the level we had, and we're going to remove the epic one, right? So we're going to use except function, go through all of those that I selected, and remove the epic one. And then we're going to obviously aggregate, because we don't want to have must not be a set, right? However, there's an error, and this is a little bit odd. So more than one function matches signature member.member. They are hierarchy, member, do I have it bigger? Yeah, here we go. There are hierarchy members and level members. And this sounds really weird, because it seems like eazyBI doesn't know which of these to use. Right? The first impression for me, at least, because there's two options and there's no what to do. Okay, so let's investigate. What can we do here? So again, what we're going to do, we're going to go to documentation, right? However, eazyBI doesn't have the documentation for members, which is a very surprise still that you guys know. But I'll tell you a secret technique on how to get more documentation information for members, and that is to use Google. We're going to type MDX members, and we're going to use other sites' documentation. A lot of the stuff is not useful because it's like a general MDX language, and eazyBI is kind of like simplified, a little bit changed language. However, we can still use the syntax and arguments, right? So you can see what the function expects us to do and how it kind of works. We can figure that out. And see, with the syntax, it says there's two options we can do. We can either specify a hierarchy and then write dot members, or we can specify a level expression, then type dot members, right? So it's not that eazyBI was confused on which one to use. It's just that we didn't specify neither hierarchy, neither members. So we just specify, but instead we specified a member, right? So, right? So that's a member. That's not a level, that's not a hierarchy, that's a member. And there's just no such function that handles a member and then returns members of that. So how do we solve this? We need to use the right function. So here, what we're going to do, we go to documentation, find the right member. So here, there's a function called children, which uses member expression. That's what we put there, right? That uses member expression, and then returns all of its children, right? So to solve this, instead of using dot members, which requires hierarchy or level, we're using members. So we'll replace this with children, and we get our solution. Now, this is a really fun error, right? You guys have a lot of fun with this probably. And to be fair, this error would require another presentation. There have been presentations about this already, but I don't want to leave you guys hanging. So here's top 2 things I suggest to do to avoid this execution error, or top 3 things. First tip for me is avoid filter function, right? This filter function, I suggest avoiding this. Try to find other solutions. And here's 2 solutions you can use. Instead of using filter function, you can try to use a tuple, or you can try to create a calculated custom field. It doesn't always work, right? These not always solve it, but these are just my suggestions, but you should be kind of thinking about. And second idea is to avoid using multiple dimensions in columns and rows. Instead, if you can, which not always true, use properties. So let's look at one of the examples. So maybe you're filtering through different issues and trying to find issues that have the highest priority, right? Instead of this, you can just use a tuple. Right? So just highest priority, issues created, and that's it. Instead of doing this that we did at the beginning, right, where we filtered fixed versions by this criteria, you can create a calculated custom field with some JavaScript that does that during the import. And when you want to put this in your report, you create a new dimension, and then you select that, yes, I want those that match that condition. And instead of using priority, let's see if you want to see priority for issues, what kind of priority issue has, instead of putting next to issues priorities like this, you can just use a property, right? That doesn't have pretty much any performance cost, works faster, and these are my top tips for speeding up your report. Thank you for your attention. Hope this was useful.
Any questions to Gvido?
Oh, a small comment. Members documentation is coming up. No worries.
Yeah, I like to hear that.
Well, the same, yeah, so that we fixed in the product that in auto-completion you can't pick anymore. For member, you can't pick the members.
Yeah, I noticed. I tried to type it, it didn't work.
Yeah, so you, on purpose, you made this invalid.
I did, yes. This is my purpose invalid, yeah.
Also, in the accept example, the one you have to accept, you also have to make it a set? You didn't have curly brackets.
I mean, it worked. It's nice.
I don't think so.
Well, I mean, look, except function will always return a set. So for that definition, previously, I don't know. Well, again, set except function by definition, if you check documentation, what return, by definition, it always returns a set. So putting curly brackets, well, you can put it, but I don't think that's.
The second argument, so it's the
Second argument.
Yeah. Okay. For that one true. That one true.
Tries to fix that problem for you.
Yeah. Sometimes, yeah, eazyBI solves a lot of problems, by the way, for you guys. I've noticed. So you don't know that you're grateful, but you should be grateful because you can do a lot of stuff and get away with a lot of stuff.
I have a question. How do you go about creating those pre-calculated JavaScript
Oh, yes.
fields?
Good question. This pre-calculated JavaScript code was I created just before the presentation using the new AI functionality. Right? We sit down together with the person and we just created this just now. So use it. Pretty good. Pretty good.
Can I get a full collection of your recommendations because I want to put it into my GPT instructions?
I don't have a list. You can start with, here's a starter list. You can start, here's a starter list, but I don't have a full list ready yet. So maybe stay tuned for maybe next year. Maybe I'll have a full year.
So any other questions? If not, then thank you, Gvido.